When you think about where people live, you assume somebody chose it. A job, a climate, a family, a price. People weigh things and settle. But there's a town in the Arctic where the rules don't work like that. If you're pregnant, you leave before you give birth. There's no maternity ward. And you fly to the mainland weeks ahead. If you die there, you're not buried there. If you lose your job, you can lose the right to stay. 2,500 people live in that town anyway, most of the year in the dark, and Norway would very much like them to keep doing it. So why does a wealthy country work this hard to keep a settlement alive at 78 degrees north? And why is it kept at it for 100 years? The answer isn't about the town, it's about what the town holds down. Svalbard is an archipelago about halfway between mainland Norway and the North Pole. Longyearbyen, the main settlement, sits at roughly 78 degrees north, about 800 miles from the pole. It's the northernmost place on Earth that's an actual town rather than an outpost. No road connecting it to anything, one airport, boats in summer. The numbers on the climate are what you'd expect. Months of polar night, when the sun doesn't come up at all. Months of midnight sun on the other side. Winter temperatures below 0 Fahrenheit for long stretches. Now, the rules. There's no maternity ward in Longyearbyen. Expectant mothers travel to the mainland before their due date. That's the practical reality of a hospital that generally doesn't deliver babies. Burials essentially stopped decades ago. The ground is permafrost, and permafrost doesn't let bodies decompose the way soil does. The old graveyard is still there, still marked, and it's not taking new residents. There's no real welfare system attached to the place. Svalbard isn't a Norwegian municipality in the ordinary sense. Lose your job and lose your housing, and there's no local safety net waiting to catch you. People leave. And then there are the bears. Polar bears in the wider Barents Sea region number somewhere around 3,000. That's the regional population, not a census of the islands. But the effect is the same. Outside the settlements, you carry a rifle. Not for fun, it's required. None of this is neglect. Every one of those rules is a decision, made and maintained by one of the wealthiest, most administratively capable countries on Earth. Norway could build a maternity ward. Norway could extend the welfare system. It hasn't. And the reason has nothing to do with the cost of a hospital wing. The Dutch explorer Willem Barents sighted the islands in 1596. He wasn't looking for them. He was looking for a shortcut to Asia over the top of Russia, and Svalbard was a thing in the way. Then came the whalers and later the coal. By the early 1900s, mining companies from several countries were working the same mountains, and there was no government of any kind. No courts or police, no law about who owned what. Men from different nations dug holes near each other and hoped it stayed civil. That's a workable arrangement until coal starts being worth real money. Then it isn't. So after the First World War, the Paris Peace Conference had to sort it out, and it faced an unusual problem. Nobody had a clean claim. Svalbard had never belonged to anyone. There was no conquest to point to, no treaty of cession, no indigenous population whose sovereignty had been transferred. It was one of the last genuinely unowned pieces of land on the planet. The solution was signed in Paris in February 1920, and it's strange. Norway gets sovereignty, full sovereignty. That language is in the treaty, and it's not ambiguous. But there are conditions. Citizens and companies from every other party to the treaty get equal rights to conduct commercial activity on the islands, equal footing with Norwegians. Norway can't discriminate, and the archipelago can't be used for warlike purposes. 9 states signed it in 1920. More have joined since. Norway's parliament puts the current count at 48 parties, and you'll see other figures in circulation, so treat the exact number as approximate. What matters is who's on the list. Russia, China, India, Japan, the United States. Countries that agree on very little agree on this. The Soviet Union recognized Norwegian sovereignty in 1924 and joined the treaty formally in 1935. And it used the Equal Access Clause immediately, which brings us to the strangest town in the Arctic. Barentsburg is a Russian coal settlement, about 35 miles from Longyearbyen. Russian school, Russian shops, Russian signage, a bust of Lenin in the square, a few hundred people, mostly Russian and Ukrainian nationals, and getting there means a boat or a snowmobile. The coal has been negligible for decades. Barentsburg is not a business. It's a presence, and it's there because a treaty from 1920 says it's allowed to be. Longyearbyen is named for John Monroe Longyear, an American businessman who started mining there in 1906. The Norwegian company Sture Norske took over the operation a decade later, and for the next century the town was a coal town. That was the entire reason it existed. On May 4th, 2026, workers sealed the entrance to Mine 7 and threw the key inside. Mine 7 was the last Norwegian coal mine on Svalbard. It opened in 1976, and production stopped in the summer of 2025 after the reserves ran down and Longyearbyen's coal power plant shut. What was left after that was cleanup. The sealing in May finished it. That's 110 years of Norwegian coal mining over. Now, in most of the world, this is a familiar story with a familiar ending. The mine closes, the payroll disappears, the young people go first, and in 30 years there's a town with a gas station and a museum. We've all seen that town. There are thousands of them. That's not what's happening here. The population held. Statistics Norway counted 2,512 people in Longyearbyen and Ny-Ålesund at the start of 2026, plus a few hundred in Barentsburg. Down slightly over recent years, but not collapsing, and the state has been actively working to keep it that way, buying up housing, restructuring the state mining company into logistics and property and energy, moving miners into other work. Norway spent a century subsidizing coal that often didn't pay, and now it's subsidizing whatever comes next. Tourism, research, a university center. The town keeps going. And a mountain outside town holds something that explains why. The Global Seed Vault opened in 2008, cut into the permafrost above Longyearbyen. It's a backup. Gene banks around the world send duplicate seed samples for free storage, and the vault now holds well over 1 million samples from more than 100 depositing institutions. Sudan sent sorghum from a collection nearly destroyed in its civil war. Brazil sent rice and beans and maize. The Philippines sent rice from a gene bank hit by typhoons and fire. Ask why the vault is on Svalbard and you'll get the geological answer. Permafrost keeps it cold without power. The rock is stable. There's no earthquake risk, and the elevation puts it above any plausible sea level rise. All true. All available in a lot of places. What's not available in a lot of places is stable, permanent, unquestioned administration by a country everyone trusts, in a location that's hard to attack and outside anyone's likely war. The world put its agricultural insurance policy on Svalbard because Norway's there, and is going to stay there. Which is worth noticing, because the vault only works if the town does. About 65 miles northwest of Longyearbyen is a place called Ny-Ålesund. It's another former coal town. The mining ended after a fatal accident in the 1960s, and its year-round population runs somewhere between 30 and 40 people. In that village, roughly 10 countries operate permanent research stations. Norway, Germany, France, the UK, Japan, South Korea, Italy, the Netherlands, India, and China. 14 or so separate stations, run independently, sharing infrastructure managed by a Norwegian state company. In summer, the population goes over 100, and scientists from around 20 nations pass through. Germany and France share a building. India's station is called Himadri and opened in 2008. China's opened in 2004 and is called the Yellow River Station. This is the Equal Access Clause of the 1920 treaty, made physical. Those countries aren't guests. They have a treaty right to be there, and the science is real. Atmospheric monitoring, glaciology, permafrost work, some of the longest continuous Arctic climate records that exist. The science is also not the only thing going on, and everybody involved knows it. China joined the Svalbard Treaty in 1925, when it was a very different country. In 2018, China published an Arctic policy white paper describing itself as a near-Arctic state, a category that doesn't exist in international law because China invented it. And the document cites Svalbard Treaty rights as part of the argument. Beijing is roughly as close to the Arctic Circle as Berlin is. The claim isn't geographic, it's legal positioning, and Svalbard is one of the few concrete hooks China has. Now, being cynical about this is easy and mostly wrong. The atmospheric data coming out of Ny-Ålesund is genuinely valuable, and the researchers there are doing science, not espionage. But a research station is also a flag you can point at. Its continuous presence. It's a seat at the table when the Arctic Council meets, and a paragraph in a legal brief if the status of these islands ever gets seriously contested. 10 countries maintain buildings in a village of 35 people. Nobody does that by accident. Drive up the mountain called Plateauberge, above Longyearbyen, and you find something that looks like a field of enormous golf balls. Those are radomes, weatherproof shells covering satellite dishes. The facility is Svalsat, run by Kongsberg Satellite Services, and it opened in 1997 with a handful of antennas. It now operates well over 100, more than any other commercial ground station in the world. Here's why they're there, and it's pure geometry. A satellite in polar orbit circles the Earth over the poles while the planet rotates underneath it. Every orbit passes near the top of the world, so a ground station far enough north can see that satellite on every single pass, about 14 times a day, while a station in Virginia or California catches it only sometimes. There are exactly 2 places on Earth that can do this for low-altitude polar orbits: Svalbard and a station Norway runs in Antarctica. The customers are the ones you'd expect: NASA, NOAA, the European Space Agency, EUMETSAT, which runs Europe's weather satellites. The data coming down those dishes feeds weather forecasts, climate records, ship tracking, search and rescue, and satellite navigation. If you checked a forecast this morning, some of the data behind it probably came down a dish on a mountain in the Arctic. And this is where the treaty gets awkward. Svalbard can't be used for warlike purposes. Satellite data doesn't sort itself neatly into military and civilian piles. A weather satellite serves both, and imaging satellites serve both even more. Norway's position is that Svalsat is a commercial civilian facility, and that military data isn't downloaded there. Norway's Communications Authority has actually rejected applications for uses it judged inconsistent with the treaty. Russia doesn't accept the distinction. Moscow has repeatedly accused Norway of violating the demilitarization clause, pointing at Svalsat and at the undersea cables that connect it to the mainland. And the accusations have gotten sharper in the last few years. This is the part people miss about that 1920 treaty. It was written by men who had just fought a war with horses and biplanes, about an island whose only value was coal. They wrote warlike purposes and thought they knew what it meant. 100 years later, the argument is about downlink schedules for satellites, and the text hasn't changed a word. Now the part that ties it together. The obvious explanation for all of this is history and national pride. Norway inherited Svalbard through a treaty. Norwegians have been mining there since 1906, and countries hold on to their territory. That's the whole story. And that's true as far as it goes. Norway is legally sovereign. Nobody seriously disputes it. But sovereignty over land isn't the valuable part. The valuable part is what the land lets you claim around it. Under the law of the sea, a coastal state gets rights over an enormous zone of ocean and seabed extending out from its territory: fishing, minerals, oil and gas, the sea floor itself. Svalbard is roughly 24,000 square miles of rock. The maritime zone attached to it is vastly larger, and it sits in the Barents Sea, which is one of the most productive fishing regions on Earth and holds real hydrocarbon potential. That's the actual prize, not the island, the water in the seabed the island generates a claim to. And it's contested, not in some hypothetical future, but right now, in court. The Arctic is also warming much faster than the global average, and the sea ice is thinning. As it does, shipping routes across the top of Russia and through the Canadian archipelago become more usable. The distance savings on an Asia to Europe voyage are real and large. I'd be careful with the dollar figures people put on this. You'll see enormous annual savings numbers quoted: icebreaker escort fees, insurance premiums, the fact that these routes are seasonal and thinly used. The reality is that container shipping wants schedule reliability more than it wants a shorter line on a map. Traffic on the northern route is still small. But it's not zero, and the legal architecture for who controls Arctic waters is being written now, while the traffic is still small, which is exactly when it's cheapest to establish a position. So look again at the rules from the beginning of this video. No maternity ward, no burials, no welfare system. Lose your job, lose your right to stay. Those aren't the rules of a normal town, because Longyearbyen isn't a normal town. It's a settlement Norway maintains, staffed by people who work, a population deliberately kept economically active. Deliberately not allowed to become a dependent community, and deliberately Norwegian, down to the smallest detail. The people living in the dark, carrying rifles, flying to the mainland to give birth, they aren't there in spite of the strategy. They are the strategy. Here's the objection, and it's a good one. Norway already has sovereignty. It's written into the treaty. It's been recognized for a century, and no one is seriously proposing to take Svalbard away from Norway. So why would 2,500 residents matter? Norway has a governor, Coast Guard vessels, an airport, and 100 years of uncontested administration. The claim holds, with or without a town. But the fight was never about the islands. In 2019, a Latvian fishing company applied for permission to catch snow crab on the continental shelf around Svalbard. Norway said no. That fishery is restricted to Norwegian vessels. The company sued. The argument was about 8 words in a 1920 treaty. Article 2 gives all treaty parties equal rights to fish and hunt in Svalbard, and in their territorial waters. Territorial waters in 1920 meant a narrow band close to shore. The concepts of an exclusive economic zone and a continental shelf didn't exist yet. They're inventions of the second half of the 20th century. So does equal access follow the law of the sea as it developed? Or is it frozen at the 1920 meaning? Norway says frozen. Equal access stops at the territorial sea, and everything beyond is ordinary Norwegian jurisdiction under the modern law of the sea. The EU says the opposite, that the treaty's non-discrimination principle has to extend to the zones that replaced the old ones, or the promise means nothing. Norway's Supreme Court heard the case and ruled unanimously for the state in March 2023. The shelf around Svalbard is outside the treaty's geographic scope. That settles it in Norwegian law. It does not settle it internationally, and the EU hasn't changed its position. It's snow crab now because snow crab is what someone tried to catch. The same argument covers oil, gas, seabed minerals, and fisheries that are moving north as the water warms. That's the real dispute, not who owns the rock, who owns everything around it. And the strength of Norway's hand in that argument isn't only legal. It's that Norway has been continuously, visibly, expensively present for 100 years. running the schools, the airport, the governor's office, the hospital that doesn't deliver babies. A country that administers a place in that much daily detail is making an argument that a Coast Guard patrol can't make. Go back to the rules. You can't be born there. You mostly can't be buried there. Lose your job and the clock starts. That seems like a list of things a place lacks. But Norway isn't running a town up there, really. It's running a 100-year-old argument, and the residents are the argument. People who work in a place that's administered in full view of every other country that signed in 1920 and would quite like the terms revisited. The coal is gone. Mine 7 is sealed and the key is inside it. The town is still there. That was always the point. The world has a structure. Let's keep finding it.